Good morning to all from the editorial board of BuildUp. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar organized in collaboration with EuroACE, Smart and Technology Equipped Buildings. Before starting, as usual, let me spend a couple of words about BuildUp. BuildUp is a collaborative platform set up by EASME since 2009, and it was born to inform all the stakeholders on new policies, best practices, and projects in the field of energy efficiency in buildings. So it's continuously updated and it represents one of the key sources of information on this topic. You can also contribute with news, events, presenting your case studies. So we invite you all to register and join the community. Please take in account that in the section webinar, learn webinar, the podcast of the past webinars are stored and it's possible to listen to all the past presentations. This is the first webinar of the year, and I would like to remind you also next appointment. As on 5th of March, we'll host a webinar in collaboration with the IB Road project that will present the path towards an energy efficient home. So in Build Up homepage, you'll find how to register and stay tuned and you'll find all the informations. Well, now I would let the floor to Hélène Sibilot, Senior EU Affairs Manager at EuroACE, and she will present the agenda and moderate the webinar. Only a final note, if you have any questions, you can write in the box on the right side of the screen, and they will be answered according to the availability of time at the end of all the presentations. Please, Elena, we can start the technical session.
It is my pleasure to welcome you all as well to this webinar. It is the third of a series that EuroACE is organizing in cooperation with BuildUp in order to promote our guide to EPBD implementation. Today's topic is Smart and Technology-Equipped Buildings, New Features from the amended EPBD. But first, who is EuroACE? EuroACE is the European Alliance of Companies for Energy Efficiency in Buildings. We represent 14 members, which are leading companies involved with the manufacture, distribution, and installation of a variety of energy-saving goods and services. Together, they employ over 283,000 employees in more than 1,300 factories and office locations in Europe. Why do we exist? We advocate for ambitious EU policies for energy efficiency in buildings. This is to bring benefits to all, citizens and businesses, through improved energy performance of buildings. And of course, to increase the markets for the products, equipment, and services offered by our member companies. So what do we work on exactly? We work on the EPBD, of course, including the development of the Smart Readiness Indicator. We also work on the Energy Efficiency Directive and the Governance Regulation. Besides, we follow the discussions on the EU 2050 strategy for a climate-neutral economy and are involved in dossiers linked to financing energy efficiency, such as MFF or sustainable finance. On the EPBD, why developing a guide? Having followed the EPBD since its first step throughout negotiations, we wanted to set out our views for the transposition and implementation phase. We wanted to share our common knowledge, our experience, and provide high-level recommendations. These recommendations are addressed at member states officials, regional and local authorities, but also other stakeholders and private actors in order to inform them about the amended EPBD and motivate them to implement ambitious policies at national level. What was our approach? You can see on the slide, the work on the guide to EPBD implementation was long and inclusive. We started back in December 2017, when the political negotiation ended, to identify key aspects to cover in our guide. After consultation with our own members, we invited expert reviewers, including the Commission as well as other stakeholders, to input our draft. And finally, we officially launched the guide last November during our first webinar with BuildUp. We already held 2 webinars, one on the long-term renovation strategies, the other one on building renovation passports and financing. To briefly present the guide, It contains 12 high-level recommendations and is structured in 6 chapters. The first chapter gives an overview of the main changes brought by the amended EPBD and is then followed by 5 thematic chapters. The first one on national long-term renovation strategies, then a chapter on building renovation passports, a powerful new tool for member states, a chapter on financing energy renovation and the link to improved energy performance, a chapter on smart and technology-equipped buildings, on which we will focus today, and finally, a chapter on how to describe the energy performance of a building and how to put energy efficiency first in that framework. So this is it from my side, a quick introduction and overview of the EuroACE guide to EPBD implementation. I also remind you that you can ask questions in a dedicated box. We will take them in a dedicated Q&A session after the 3 presentations. Now we can move on to today's topics, and we will start with the first presentation by Stefan Kobb, who is Director of Industry Affairs Heating at Danfoss. Danfoss is a member of EuroACE, and Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Ellen. It's a pleasure to be here today. This webinar, highly relevant topic from our view. So what I'm going to do in the next couple of minutes is to basically sketch out a little bit our thoughts on the smart and technology-equipped buildings, which basically means in terms of the new words of the amended Buildings Directive. I will have a little bit of deep dive into the technical building systems. These elements, which are more, I would say, basic measures that are available for a long time in the market, but not yet basically standard in many cases. And smart buildings, an emerging topic, which is more linked also, for example, to the role of buildings in a changing and transitioning energy system. So this will be the structure, technical building systems and smart buildings. So why do we speak about technical building systems? It is basically because of 2 reasons. Because technical building systems is and their optimization is an integrated part of the overall, I would say, performance optimization of a building, both energy performance and comfort, and more also, I would say, bidirectional coupling of buildings into grids. So it is basically the 3 dimensions, envelope, energy generation, supply, and the control of the energy flows that you have to get right to achieve the objectives of decarbonized buildings, energy efficient buildings. That is the basic message. And we made an assessment of basically what that actually means, what is the improvement potential. And Ecofys made a study, a deep dive into this optimization of technical building systems. Here it's really the term systems that counts, and they evaluated that the improvement potential amounts to 27 MTOE by 2030 per year by doing pretty basic stuff, and I will show you in a minute what pretty basic stuff means into today's heating, cooling systems, for example. And there's a large greenhouse gas reduction potential, 61 megatons per year by 2030 if you do certain things in certain scenarios, but also meaning that if we want to combat climate change and reduce effectively the greenhouse gas emissions, it's of course I would say the aggregated emissions that you can reduce, and there we have an improvement potential until 2030 aggregated of around 400 megatons. Next slide. The new Buildings Directive has strengthened, in our view, considerably this basically the aspects tackling the market barriers that prevents in many cases to basically reap this potential. I think at some point we called it the sleeping giant. And just in a nutshell, it's the Article 8.1 that remained basically unchanged, but still to remind you that it's the Article 8.1, which basically says that when member states shall ensure that the system performance of a space cooling, a domestic hot water ventilation system has to be optimized. It's not only, for example, the heat generator replacement that counts. That is, for example, covered by eco-design, but it's the system optimization that has to be tackled. That is there since 2010. Then what is really new is the third subparagraph of this Article 8.1. It's singling out one basic feature, which is basically many people call it individual room temperature control. It means that you should ensure that each room has its own temperature control, so that really you can adapt the room temperature controls in an efficient, effective way to your own needs. That is new, and basically the new directive says that it has to be ensured that when you exchange a heat generator and you don't have room temperature control, you shall bring it in. Then there's a new part on basically strengths and documentation of works that were carried out to meet these system requirements, a very important point in our view to make it really work. And then there was basically enlargement of the scope of technical building systems. So the definitions have changed a bit. It was clarified that we speak about space heating, and then more important that it was the scope of technical building systems was enlarged to building automation and control systems and on-site electricity generation. And in that context, also a definition of building automation and control system was added. What I've not mentioned here is, for example, the SRI, because Sylvain will touch upon this dedicatedly in his presentation, but it's also part of the new Article 8 setting, including also electromobility, of course. Next slide. So what does it actually mean to optimize a system? I like to show this graph. I think it's from a standard. From a EPBD standard, from a building standard. It basically means that you look into heat generation, into heat distribution, and then how do you distribute and control and transfer heat, for example, to the rooms or the zones that you have in a building. So basically, it means that you optimize this whole value chain of heat generation, distribution, emission. That is what we have in mind when we speak about system optimization. Next slide, please. And what that actually means in the case of space heating, it means that, as I said, you optimize heat generation, heat distribution, heat emission. It means, for example, that you need to have a certain way of distributing the energy that you have in a heating system in the pipes flowing by hydraulic balancing. It's mentioned in Recital 35 that this is a cheap measure that is not basically present in most buildings today. So there's a huge benefit from that. And what we expect for hydraulic balancing rollout is that you can save 10 megatons of greenhouse gas emissions in the residential sector only. And it's paying back in a couple of years, 3 to 8 years. And that's the result that we will try to use in Germany to strengthen now in the new German legislation the role of this particular system optimization measure in new buildings legislation. So highly economic and highly, I would say, environmentally beneficial. And then it's another part which says that if you optimize this system, and if you look into the building's performance, you should do it basically with a view to real life operating conditions. So you have to really target the actual consumption, not only what you certify or what you put on energy labels and what you put on basically in calculations which are theoretical and which often basically target only the so-called design loads or the maximum temperature difference that you need to cover, for example, the heating system, minus 15 degrees outside, but usually we have 5 degrees. So you really have to see that you optimize the performance under these, as we call it, typical operating conditions that dynamically vary, and that is set out in Recital 36. And then you have other measures, for example, adjusting basically the output of your heat generator to the outside temperature. You have to insulate the pipes well so that they really do not lose energy where you don't want to lose it, and so on. Next slide. So basically, this is technical building system optimization using pretty basic stuff. More forward-looking, more innovative, more, I would say, let's say, making buildings part of the energy transition and the energy system transition is smart building. So why do we speak about this? Because we see beyond the basic measures that there's a huge potential in smart ICT-based systems to do more on energy performance, to do more on comfort, to really monitor. I would say that the building does what it should do. You can detect faults. You can basically support the maintenance of your system in a very good way. That's the thinking behind some of the elements in the buildings directive. And it also means in particular that buildings will become much more integrated and much deeper integrated, bidirectionally integrated into the energy system, because they will do much more than just consume energy and heat or provide hot water or ventilate and exchange air. So that's why we speak about the smart buildings. And there's a whole range of elements in the new buildings directive, which is really, as I see it, driving innovation. I see it in our own company. We really now see what we should do in the portfolio to get ready for this shift. So it's really an innovation driver. And as I said, we have the smart readiness indicator. Sylvain will touch upon this in detail. We have a provision that means to exploit I would say, the potential of buildings to make the energy transition and transport, to have e-vehicle charging infrastructure brought into residential, non-residential buildings. And then we have something which is pretty important for our sector, which says that by 2025, you shall make sure that non-residential buildings around 1,500 square meters hooked up to a capacity of the technical building systems shall be equipped by so-called building automation control system capabilities. And then beyond that, you have incentives to bring also electronic monitoring and fault detection into residential buildings in a more structured way. Next slide. So the examples and trends that are in our view linked to this smart building concept is basically this continuous commissioning that is mandated by bringing out building automation and control systems into non-residential buildings. It's of course much linked to energy carrier and technology shift. It's bringing in the heat pumps instead of fossil fuel heat generators. A big issue, electrification is the buzzword here. Then of course we are operating anyway in the framework of energy efficiency first. So we want to have nearly zero energy buildings. We want to reduce the energy consumption by good envelopes, and then of course we want to provide the remaining energy need in a sustainable, to a large extent renewable based way. That means, for example, you bring on-site renewables, solar thermal, for example, is one thing that you can do. And of course, you will have a lot of photovoltaics. You will have photovoltaic self-consumption, also supported by the new electricity market design. E-vehicle charging is a key for the energy transition in the transport sector. And then a very important element is this idea to really have bidirectional coupling of buildings into electricity and district energy grids. I would like to stress here, it's not only electricity, it's district energy, because district energy is also key for, I would say, the heat transition, the energy transition in heating. And with a fuel shift also in district energy, less CHP, less the combined heat and power, less fossil fuels, more, I would say, waste heat, more renewables, diversified energy carriers. This bidirectional control of heat demand in buildings will become more and more important. And of course, here the buzzword is demand side management, and a key is security of supply. For example, when Germany now announces to phase out coal in the hard coal and lignite, the key question is how do you have a security supply in the resulting system if you take out all this firm, I would say, electricity and district heating generation capacities. And that was this new role of buildings was, in my view, nicely depicted by BPIE in the dedicated report, I think, which is pretty recent, 1 or 2 years old. Last slide. So our view on now basically converting all these great elements that we have in the new EPBD into national laws is basically the following. Of course, as usual in the directive, you have feasibility exemptions related to economic and technical reasons. So of course, it's a banal statement, but those feasibility exemptions should really be limited to the real problematic cases. And I think the draft EU Commission guidance that was agreed with the member states, I think to a large extent already, provides really a very good yardstick how this should be done. So we are really supportive of that. Then when it comes to the technical building system requirements, of course, we believe that it's really beneficial for people, for the economy, for the environment, that you bring in this no regret, fast payback measures that are envisaged by the new EPBD. Then this idea to have actual consumption and focus when you speak about building performance is a key in our view, also for, I would say, maintaining the trust and the motivation to invest into the energy transition in buildings, both I would say from an institutional investor, but also from a private investor perspective. Then we have a discussion about hooking up, or what are the criteria for economic feasibility when you look into what should be done and what should not be done. For us, it's clear, as also clarified in the EU Commission guidelines, that it's the amortization period that should count, in particular for these low investment measures, which are not very expensive usually. So we speak about small amounts of upfront cost. So it's the amortization period that should be taken and not additional capex where possible. Then when you have this implementation of the BACS requirements, we have a certain way how to translate them into actual and practicable ways, and by using a certain well-established standard. And our message is that you should really reap the benefits by looking into the good control performance and the good electronic performance indicators that you have there, but also the hydronics, because it's a package that counts after all. And then it's of course keep the residential in focus, despite the fact that the incentives for residentials are much less biting than for the non-residential arena, just because of the feasibility and I would say the state of the energy union and the EU. It was much more feasible to do something on non-residential than to intervene into people's houses. But let's not forget about this. And then, of course, when we speak about the renovation strategies, it's very important that we have a holistic, it's not a nice word, I know, but I think it's needed, a holistic view to see what can be really achieved by fuel switch optimization, bidirectional coupling, and then what is really the I would say the overlap and the implication for the envelope requirements, so that you have a long-term renovation strategy that is really conclusive to a decarbonized and energy efficient building stock. That's it from my side.
Thank you, Stefan, for your presentation on the key changes from the amended EPBD in relation to TBS and smart buildings. Now we're on to Sylvain Robert, who is Policy Officer at DG Energy in the European Commission, and he will give us the perspective from policymakers on the topic and focus on the smart readiness indicator.
Thanks, Hélène, for this kind introduction. Thanks a lot to EuroACE and to BuildUp for the organization of this very interesting webinar and for their invitation. So I would like to switch to next slide. Thanks. I will start with a bit of context. The context is, of course, the Clean Energy for All Europeans package that I guess most of you know about. This package is a major policy initiative by the European Commission. It was adopted end of 2016, and its aim is to drive us to a completely different energy system. It covers different areas: electricity market design, renewable energy, energy efficiency, and all this in a consistent way, as it's now underpinned by a governance regulation which ensures the consistent implementation of all the components of the package. On the energy efficiency side, I would like to highlight three main instruments. The first is the Energy Efficiency Directive, and I would highlight in particular the target that we have for 2030, 32.5%. I would also underline that eco-design and energy labeling regulations are also major instruments in the area of energy efficiency, and a major round of revisions of these regulations has just concluded. And of course, last but not least, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, which has been amended with two priorities in mind: renovation of buildings, and modernization of buildings. So the amended EPBD entered into force on 9 July 2018. In relation to renovation, I'm not going to detail because this is not the focus of the webinar today, but I would just like to mention that the amended EPBD introduces strengthened long-term renovation strategies in view of the decarbonization of building stocks by 2050, and it puts a very strong emphasis on financing of energy efficiency. In relation to modernization, the EPBD includes new provisions to promote smart technologies and reinforce existing ones. These have already been listed by Stefan, but just to remind that we have the expansion of the definition of technical building systems to include building automation and control systems and on-site electricity generation. The requirements to put in place regular inspections of heating and air conditioning systems in Article 14 and 15 have their scope increased to include also combined systems with ventilation. In the scope of these provisions, electronic monitoring and building automation and control are allowed as full alternatives to the inspections. The Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, as amended, also includes new requirements on the installation of self-regulating devices, building automation and control systems in large non-residential buildings. I would also mention the requirements on the deployment of electric vehicle recharging infrastructure in buildings car parks in Article 8. And of course, the amended EPBD requires the Commission to establish a new instrument to allow for rating the smart readiness of buildings. Next slide. This smart readiness indicator will be an optional common union scheme for rating the smart readiness of buildings. To give an analogy, the objective would be to express smart readiness of buildings in a way that is similar to expressing energy performance with an energy performance certificate. The smart readiness indicator will be established thanks to two legal acts, which will cover respectively the definition and calculation methodology and the technical modalities for its implementation in the Union. The SRI is established by the European Commission, and the related legal acts are drafted by the Commission services. But to support this work, technical studies have been launched. The first one concluded in August 2018, and the second one is ongoing. It started end of December 2018. We need a very strong involvement of the stakeholder community in this process in order to ensure that the smart readiness indicator will be successful. Why establishing this new instrument? Stefan already underlined some of the benefits of smart technologies. What we see is that smart technologies are beneficial for buildings, and we see that despite this, their uptake remain limited compared to the potential we see. We think we need to raise awareness of building owners and of customers with regard to these benefits and to stimulate investments in such technologies. In our view, the smart readiness indicator, by improving awareness and understanding of smart technologies in buildings, can support the transition to smarter buildings with positive impacts not only on energy performance, but also on comfort and well-being. This indicator is also an opportunity to improve policy linkages with other initiatives. I refer, of course, to policies in the area of digitalization, but also to others, for instance, in relation to health and well-being in buildings. Lastly, making buildings smart ready means improving their energy flexibility, which can support the advent of future smart energy grids. In terms of scope, the smart readiness indicator will cover the capabilities of buildings at operation phase. And more precisely, the directive requires the SRI to cover three capability areas. First, the capability of a building to optimize performance and operation, then the ability of a building to adapt to users' needs, maintaining healthy indoor climate conditions, and lastly, the ability of a building to adapt its consumption, so energy flexibility. As I mentioned, the technical work on the development of the smart readiness indicator has started. We had a first technical study that concluded in August 2018, which constitutes a good starting basis. This first study mainly investigated the calculation methodology of the indicator. There was a significant involvement from stakeholders in this study, and I would like to thank all the people who have been involved. The results generally have been quite welcomed by the community, but of course there are a lot of open points which remain, and further work and discussion are needed to reach a consensus on the best approach for calculating the SRI and for implementing the scheme in the Union. This further work and discussion will be supported by a second technical study which started end of December 2018. This second study will not only consolidate the methodological framework, but also will investigate implementation pathways for the SRI and perform a detailed analysis of potential impacts. Again, we wish to ensure an extensive consultation of stakeholders. This instrument can be a success only if it meets expectations of the stakeholders and of course of the member states. So if you are interested, you are more than welcome to join the initiative and register as a stakeholder on the study's website, which link you can find on this slide. And I wish to inform you that the next stakeholder meeting will take place on 26 March in Brussels. Lastly, just to underline that digitalization of building energy is not only about the EPBD, is not only about the SRI. In particular, in DG Energy, we see a clear complementarity between the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive and the Smart Readiness Indicator on the one side, and eco-design and energy labeling regulations on the other side. We have ongoing studies on energy smart appliances and building automation and control systems. And our aim in DG Energy is to articulate these different initiatives to effectively and consistently support smartness in buildings. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sylvain, for this presentation and information about the ongoing work on the Smartness Readiness Indicator. Now I will give the floor to Anita Derjanes, who is Managing Director at REVA. REVA is the Federation of European Heating, Ventilation and Air Conditioning Associations, and she will give us more insights from the experience of building service engineers, so from the experience from the ground. So Anita, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Helen, for the invitation and the introduction. So first of all, I would like to congratulate actually EuroACE for this very useful guideline that came out recently. I think it's capturing very good the key points for practitioners that REVA is also representing. So next slide, please. Just to highlight who we are. So REVA is a federation of engineering societies across Europe. So our members are national engineering associations representing more than 100,000 building service engineers who are system designers, commissioning experts, energy consultants, so practitioners working on buildings from 27 European countries. Our main aim and mission is to advocate the improvement of health, comfort and safety in, and energy performance of all buildings and communities in Europe. And for this, REVA being quite an old association, we have extensive knowledge sources for engineers. I just want to highlight a couple of them where we try to promote also EPBD implementation from the very beginning, from the first EPBD, and a kind of harmonized and high quality engineering practice across Europe. For this, we have publications, journals that is here and is available on our website, and guidebooks. Dealing, of course, with many topics related to EPBD implementation. And we have a new initiative also, the EPB Center, which is a new, joint initiative with other key partners where we would like to support the uptake and the implementation of EPB standards. So briefly, that's who we are. And next slide, please. Yeah, so I would just to highlight our key priorities during the EPBD review, the latest EPBD review. These were basically the priorities and along which REVA expressed its opinion and position for the next EPBD. With actually quality, proper maintenance and performance through mandatory inspection and technical monitoring is the most important for this topic today. Next slide, please. So after this very good presentation around the topic what the new revised EPBD contains regarding technical building systems and the building automation and control. So I would just like to highlight a couple of key issues for us. So regarding inspection, we saw the changes in the guide of EuroACE in the field of inspection. So for our practitioners and our position in the field, it is always remains the same, that inspection matters. So somehow checking systems, not even only from energy point of view, is good, because we see the value of actually obligatory schemes and regulations. So to some extent, the function of inspecting systems should be kept. So that's why we pretty much agree with what is also in the guide, that since now the smaller systems that won't have necessarily building automation and control and are not in the scope of obligatory inspection schemes, we should deal with them in some way. So either keeping the existing schemes, being aware of the fact that there are not many who actually worked, and well, we have also in an ideal world to widen the scope of inspections, actually not main energy only, but somewhere to comfort and indoor environmental quality related criteria, including ventilation. There is ongoing work and thinking within the Commission as well, how whether and how this is possible to achieve. Regarding the advice option, which was kept already from the previous version of the EPBD, but it's still kept in the current one as an alternative to inspection or testing of systems. We think it's a less optimal option, because it opens a wide range of possibilities what a member state can do. So we agree with also with the fact that in case there are these schemes in place, the impact and the quality of such a scheme should be indeed verified. And the last and important point for us is that we consider inspection, however it will evolve in the future using digitalization. It's important to say that we need a third-party independent checking of the system performances or operation. Next slide, please. And now, yeah, what digitalization brings in this whole concept. So, of course, the future will be moving towards ICT-based solution and using digitalization in the whole construction and HVAC sector. So these ICT and digitalization enable cost-efficient ways also for inspection and testing system performances on a much broader level and scope. So that's where actually we can bring in comfort, indoor environment quality, and proper maintenance for the system that for the systems, meaning building systems or districts that so system that use actually ICT and digital technologies. What is still important to keep in mind that however we do it, inspection and digital monitoring, electronic monitoring should be based on well-defined parameters, criteria, and data that are captured in a transparent way. And that's why now bugs, we welcome also the fact, of course, that bugs are there is a more focus, and bugs are officially now in the definition of technical building systems. So it's a very good possibility to actually get the data that we need for the different tools and possibilities, improving our building performance, and that this data that the building automation control systems should deliver should be clearly defined for even pre-design or design phases from a system for a new building or buildings that undergo major renovation also will change the whole system as well, so that there is a need to work together along the life cycle of a building. Next slide, please. And just to highlight some solutions that we are actually working on, or what we focus on. So just to the challenges actually to highlight. So regarding these complex systems that buildings became, especially larger buildings, the non-residential buildings, is just actually from Germany. The examples of how the actually national standards and different regulations and standards changed in January regarding building automation and control. So as you can see from 73 small booklet on automation is today now a huge standard. And on the other side, you can see how many standards and regulations are there to being considered just regarding the heating system of building. And then in addition, of course, we have the also international and different building rating schemes that have also rules and criteria regulations. Next slide, please. And so this complexity actually brought another challenge. So buildings as complex technical system, or even districts, if we talk about the better connected picture, brought actually a problem of performance gap. So that's something that we have to focus on, or our engineers and designers focus on now, how to this increasing gap between the designed and actual performances can be addressed and decreased. And one solution is actually to move toward using ICT-based solutions to move towards actually from inspection to a digitalized and ICT-based quality management of buildings. And digitalization can make these services, so can bring it on the market new services that are fast, transparent, and cost-effective. Next slide, please. So just to highlight one also linked on European projects, one development that Riva was also part and is part. It's an ongoing European project where we try to define what is this technical monitoring that can close the performance gap and bring in the other solutions that other functionalities that I highlighted in the previous slide, without going into details. So that basically we defined along the building life cycle where are the gaps there which bring eventual faults where the system can fail, and try to address it in some way, and develop tools that can using ICT backs and digitalization to minimize the fault, the risk of fault, or the faults that actually are there, so to achieve from the design phase during operation actually the optimized and best performance of buildings. Next slide, please. So that's what we call technical monitoring, and it was developed again within a European project led by among others, the German partners from Germany. And basically this digitalization makes possible to develop a very complex service behind the building quality management that can still, a cost-effective way, ensure for larger buildings and systems that the performances are delivered and met actually by specification of all the system inputs, all the criteria that the system should deliver, and then making sure that by testing and reporting, either by handover or during operation, like ongoing continuous monitoring, to achieve and optimize and achieve high-performing buildings. Next slide. And just a related policy, good practice. I want to highlight here as well that this scheme and that technical monitoring as a service was uptaken in Germany by the federal ministry as well. So it exists now for a specific sector of buildings. So it's a guideline for public buildings. So like a guideline to ask for technical monitoring when it comes to public buildings construction or renovation. Next slide, please. So digitalization is changing our whole sector already, and of course we see the importance of this, and that brings us to the future actually, which the EPBD, the revised EPBD, tries also to capture, because it's done for the next 10 years at least. And we see also the difficulty how European regulation can actually develop something useful for practitioners to be implemented in the regulatory environment. It's a big challenge, but what it means for us, so smart buildings and smart users, I would like to stress also the fact that for us it's also an upcoming important trend to put the user, actually the occupant, the building occupant, in the center of the system. So ICT and digitalization in the HVAC sector brings a complete new way of how we consider building performances and how we operate our buildings, because it enables, of course, the continuous monitoring and measurement of data. It enables users to be more aware and to get proper information and eventually advice to change their behavior or optimize their energy use, to enable us, of course, going towards the district and integration of different smart technologies and integration within a district, the integration of renewable energies. So within all these landscape, actually there is the new services, a new approach of HVAC and construction sector related services on their way. Next slide, please. So, and just to highlight, because we had really good insights from the previous presentation, so what it means for us to put the user, the occupant in the center. So again, the digitalization and continuous monitoring of the buildings also help to address more comfort to the user needs, so serving the user, so delivering a comfort-related service to our building occupants, which is pretty much in line what REVA advocates for, delivering high indoor environment quality at the same time. Yeah, so basically, with being able to give this service, it helps us to capture better, actually, the user-related aspects. And last slide, please. And then coming to the smart readiness indicator. So actually, the smart readiness indicator launch initiated by the revised EPBD can be a very good tool to capture somehow from the user's perspective as well the adaptability or the capability of a building to be smart, however we define smart building. But after, as Sylvain presented the process right now, so following the first study, we still think that there are open questions. So we are looking forward to the actually upcoming second study, because our experts are concerned about how, without being, how quantitative versus qualitative such a calculation methodology should be, because it's important that the system is meaningful to the user. So it ensures the occupants and end users that actually it has a meaning. And that's why we are advocating to be more performance-based or quantity-based when calculating or assessing the smart readiness. So that's why if it's defined correctly or well, the SRI could be really a meaningful positive effect on the market and strive real towards smart buildings. So yeah, as one of the stakeholders, we are committed to take part in the second study and also look into how this whole scheme could be implemented, because that will be the second big challenge to define. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita, for your presentation. Very useful, and also to get your view on the smart readiness indicator. Now we are onto the questions and answers session, and we have until 1:15, so about 25 minutes. Just before that, for your information, yes, we will make the presentation slides as well as the recording available on our website, so the EuroACE website, as well as on the BuildUp website. So no worries about that. So the first question is for Stefan. And the question is, do you think that smart buildings do not need any more inspection of their heating and air conditioning systems, since all defects should be reported by the smart technologies?
Thanks for the question. No, that's not basically, it's not black and white, I would say, and I guess you would agree, right? We see this building automation control system functionalities as basically a continuous monitoring, so that basically it enables you to do what we call often preventive maintenance, right? So that you really get the right signals, and you don't get it, I don't know, after 5 years or 10 years because somebody has asked somebody to make an inspection. But it's really the continuous, I would say, the continuous monitoring that is counting there, so that then somebody can really check, the state of the dampers, or I would say the burners, or all the stuff that can fail, and you do it basically on time and in time, so that you get a better comfort, health, and energy performance by that, I would say, preventive maintenance, continuous monitoring approach.
Thank you, Stefan. I have another question that is related, and it's also for Sylvain. And the question is, could the inspections and testing be done remotely by the smart building? And how much time do we need to implement this remote controls in the current European building stock? I don't know who wants to start, Sylvain maybe, and then Stefan.
So many thanks for this interesting and forward-looking questions. Well, whether we could implement the inspections in a digital way is something that is currently open. It really depends, I would say, on the implementation modalities that are favored by the member states. And provided the impact of the inspections and provided the scope, the coverage of the inspections is in line with what is required in the directive, I think it should be something possible. So this is the policy perspective. Stefan, if you want to add something.
Yes, I mean, it's when we look into the question around technical and economic feasibility, I think that is one of the key aspects here, right? And that is now in practice. For example, in Germany, we have you mentioned the AMEF initiative, right? So there's a lot of activity now saying, okay, we look into the building stock, what is really feasible, and so that it's in line with the technical and economic feasible principles that you have in the directive. And we believe there is, I would say, there is so many existing both technologies, but also conceptual work. For example, I mentioned one of the standards that yes, of course, we believe it is in most of the cases it will be feasible and it will be useful. But of course, there will also be quite practical difficulties. For example, if you have a certain self-standing split units, how to integrate them into a I would say an integrated building management system. That is something we still have to look into. It's not that we have everything for each situation. We have everything in the pocket. That's not the case. But I think for most of the situations, there's a good idea what needs to be done to make it happen.
So it's Sylvain again speaking, just to, again, from a policy perspective, this question could be related to some provisions of the EPBD in Article 14 and 15, and in particular connected to the alternatives that are allowed to the regular inspections of technical building systems. And these alternatives can be based on building automation and control systems which have certain capabilities which are described in these articles, more exactly in paragraph 4. And also these alternatives can be based on continuous electronic monitoring in the case of residential buildings. And again, the expected functionalities are described in the articles in paragraph 5.
Yes, then we have a few questions that are actually linked to skills and data transfer, knowledge transfer, and these questions are for Anita. The question is, in order to achieve smart buildings, are we able to do it with the current construction skills? Is the construction sector prepared to react quickly to the need of smarter buildings? And a linked question is, knowledge transfer is key for the evolution of the sector and the modernization of the stock. Are there actions to be taken about data gathered by monitoring and inspection?
Thank you, Helen. Yes, so skills, of course, we didn't touch upon this, is a major problem or issue regarding, well, our members who are the designers and engineers. We do a lot, and it's not, yeah, so we, since years also before the, of course, before the we revised the EPBD, there is ongoing education, and the education catches up. Now, regarding the construction sector workers, of course, like installers and let's say blue collar workers, there are initiatives by the Commission, so the Build Up Skills initiative. I'm quite certain that digitalization will influence this market as well. So, I mean, this sector as well, not so how to install, how to maintain, and how to teach installers and yeah, installers working with the equipment. So the shift is there, and but there is an awareness as well, and yeah, ongoing initiatives. And sorry, and the second part of the question was to yes, yeah, knowledge transfer. Yes, so I highlighted you, for example, these European projects. So there are many ongoing national and international initiatives regarding, yeah, and many research put into how the big data should be analyzed. And yes, our knowledge is growing, start also from the manufacturing side and also from the designer side of engineers. So.
So Sylvain speaking, just to react on the part of the question that relates to gathering collection of data. It's a very interesting topic, and it's a topic on which in the European Commission we are putting a lot of emphasis. You might have noted that in the amended EPBD now there are provisions that requires databases for energy performance certificates to allow data to be gathered on measured and or calculated energy consumptions, and that these data, aggregated anonymized data, shall be made available on request for statistical and research purposes and to building owners. So this is for the policy side, and we are also funding an initiative that is called the Building Stock Observatory, in which we want to collect a lot of data from buildings in the European Union, and our intention is to expand the scope of the BSO and to consolidate the way data are fed to this Building Stock Observatory. And we have other actions in the area of research and innovation, in particular on big data. So clearly this is a hot topic from a policy perspective.
And actually, we have the next question also for Sylvain. And it's a question actually confronting, I would say, the perspectives from speakers to the Commission. And the question is, do the Commission agree that the alternative approaches like advice for inspections are less optimal? It was stated by some of the speakers, and I think we could agree. So we would like to have the Commission view on that.
We do not have any a priori view on the alternatives to inspections, because of course it all depends on the alternative, because there are many ways to implement these alternatives to inspections. What we want to be sure of is that the impact is equivalent to inspection. And by the way, this is what is required by the EPBD. And this impact has to be documented, and a report has to be submitted to the Commission to document the equivalence of the impact. So of course, we'll make sure to properly review these reports.
This is Stefan speaking, and it's on the alternative. I think it was a big debate in the I would say in the negotiations on the buildings directive, right? Because originally you had proposed to take the alternatives out. And I think that was personally, I think that was a logical step, because what the inspections are supposed to do is to contribute to maintenance, right? So when I see this, these alternative measures, for example, speaking about subsidy programs to accelerate the replacement of heat generators and so on. It's of course it's another, you can say it has a certain energy efficiency or energy saving impact, but of course it's not conclusive to the original intention of the inspections, which says, okay, when I have installed something, I make sure that the maintenance or the over time, by maintenance, the system runs efficiently. So I accept that I lose efficiency in existing installations by giving subsidies to maybe something else, right? And that is in itself, I think, a wrong, I would say, a wrong mechanism, and it's not hitting basically the original impact of the inspections, contributing to well maintained performance.
And then if we're staying on the topic of technical building systems and BACs, I have a question on the costs. That is for Stefan. How do you assess the risk that costs of technical building systems and BACs, installation, maintenance, inspections, may be higher than the energy savings, and especially for small buildings and individual housing?
So I think it's the question of technical and economical feasibility, right? So it's first, of course, you need to define what you have in mind. So I think sometimes it's that if something pays back longer than 3 years, it's not attractive. Or I think in the guidance it was mentioned that 5 years is a good indicator. In Germany, there's a rule saying it is economic if it pays back within the lifetime of the investment, which can be 15 or 20 years. So it's a little bit a broad question, but I think in general, these measures that we speak about, I think both the basic measures and the advanced measures usually have a payback which is within very attractive, I would say, in which is in the very attractive field of a couple of few years, or maybe 7, 8, 9 years, which is still, I think, in my personal expectation, still very attractive. And of course, it's always then also the question, to which extent do you monetize comfort or health improvements by putting more, I would say, sensors or overseeing the certain concentrations of certain substances in there. So I think we are very we try to be very sharp on the cost effectiveness and the economic feasibility, because it's our own also in the interest to be sharp on that, to also, I would say, be clear when something does not make sense, because you have to do a huge rework for floor heating system. If you want to do certain things, for example, then I think we have to acknowledge that maybe something, then it's not cost effective, and then it should not be mandated.
And this is Anita speaking, and just adding, because the question also asked about residential sector. So it's clear that, and the EPBD is also clear on that, the complex building and operation and control systems are there for larger systems. For bigger, so individual homes, it will be a different landscape. And I would just like to highlight the trend that is coming now, that since the user will be in the center, so we see a trend that actually the service landscape of age or of comfort related service will change. So in the future, you might not sell individual equipments, but you may sell comfort to the individual user in the home, and then it changes the whole perspective. So that will also have an effect on the economic feasibility and what the owner is ready to pay using the smart devices in their homes.
Thank you, Anita. I will also then come back to a part which we didn't address in the Q&A, which is the smart readiness indicator. And we have the first question for Sylvain. Someone asks, do we have any news on the piloting of the smart readiness indicator, the pilot's phase?
So many thanks for this question. Regarding the way I understand the question is when and how we would have a test phase for a draft, let's say, smart readiness indicator. It's planned as part of the second technical study, and more information will be given as part of the next stakeholder meeting on 26 March. In any case, we think that testing could start typically after the summer, once we have a first consolidation of the calculation methodology of the indicator.
Thank you, Sylvain, for the news. Linked to smart buildings, I have a question here for both Stefan and Anita. And the question is, can a smart building operate in a context where you have several proprietary softwares and bad interoperability between them?
I'll leave it to Anita.
No, I just don't think
so. Thanks for the question. I think the answer is already given a little bit in how the question is phrased, but I think it's clear that from the mandated, I would say, functionalities that you have linked to the bugs in the bigger non-residential buildings, interoperability is a part of it. And then, of course, it's the question of okay, where do you draw the boundaries? There are several communication protocols for the building automation control domain itself, KNX, BACnet, and there are more. And then, of course, it's the question is, how do you link it then to the outside to this demand response functionalities? And I know that there is standardization work ongoing. There are the initiatives coming out of the Lot 33 on smart appliances. So I think I would lie if I would claim to have the full answer to that. But I think the problem awareness is there, and it's also basically then making, of course, sure that you have I would say protocols and that are open or open source, or that can be plugged in a certain way into proprietary technology. And I think that's the way ahead, and I think that is the way standardization is taking.
Yes, so we agree on this. So without repeating the previous one, so there are also opinions that call for standardization, so that we have to have standardized protocols that are used everywhere. And there are many ongoing initiatives also related to, for example, BIM or the new the upcoming EPC. So how to make every data so we strive for more standardization, and indeed the systems have to be operable and interoperable, and they are not yet.
And then also on the smart readiness indicator, we have a question more on the policy side. We know that the use of the SRIs is now an optional instrument. It's not completely defined. So the question is, how could member states start to implement the measure in relation with this new indicator? What should they do? What could they start to do? Maybe that's more for the Commission.
Thanks for this very relevant question. The member states have in any case a major role to play in the policy-making process, because as I mentioned, the smart readiness indicator is going to be established thanks to 2 legal acts. These acts are adopted by the Commission. These are so-called autonomous acts. But of course, the member states and the Parliament to some extent have a role in supervising and accompanying this process. Regarding member states, they will be consulted and their opinion will be taken through the Energy Performance of Buildings Committee, where they all have representatives, and will also ask the member state to appoint experts specifically for the development of the SRI Act. So what they can do right now is to make sure that they are involved in this process. For some of them, they could appoint particular technical experts in order to make sure they have the right expertise to follow the development of the indicator, and that will be what we would expect from them.
Also related to smart buildings, we have 2 questions that are more linked to technologies. Maybe this is for Stefan and Anita, or also the Commission. A question is about building information modeling, BIM. How will BIM affect the change to smart buildings in Europe? What's actually the planned time frame to a harmonized introduction inside the EU? And another question that is linked to technologies. Someone saying some transparent envelope solutions are being developed with embedded photovoltaic systems. How should we treat them according to the new EPBD? So I don't know who wants to start. Anita?
So that's a very complex question. So I start regarding BIM. So there are many ongoing research and initiatives to develop comprehensive integrated BIM systems, also supported by the European Commission. So the timeline, well, I don't have estimations because it's a very complicated process, but what we want to achieve is indeed to create some integrated new BIM schemes that can cover the whole building life cycle actually, and collect data, eventually be used for the performance assessment as well. And yeah, that is coming, but I don't know if the Commission has any technology road mapping for the rollout timeline when the harmonized BIM schemes should be launched. But yeah, it will last years, and yeah, we are working on it in any case.
Thanks, Anita. For what regards building information modeling, this is, of course, a topic we are following very closely. Our colleagues of DG GROW are actually the ones who are leading our initiatives in the area of digital construction, and they are doing, I would say, a marvelous work in pushing best practices in this area. I would particularly refer to the handbook for BIM-based public procurement that they advertised, that they made available, and which has been, I would say, quite successful in the Union. And they have several initiatives in this area. Regarding standardization, what I know is that there is this building smart initiative that we all know about, the Industry Foundation Classes Standard, for instance, which is an open standard. It's not per se coming from the Commission, but of course we do have, I would say, positive views on open standards. That's all I can say about this issue.
This is Stefan. Just to add on the standardization, there's ongoing work at international level, at ISO level, bringing really all economies around the table to make this the BIM the BIM standardization really taking off, to say, because it's the speaking about interoperability and I would say common approaches, that will be the basis. So there's a high level of activity, and it's work in progress, but it's very complicated.
Just a short comment. So regarding the HVAC sectors, to highlight that there is an initiative. It's also comes from the industry called ProdBIM, which aims to provide information of every HVAC installation that can be plugged in or used in BIM modeling systems.
Thank you, Anita and Sylvain and Stefan, for responding to the questions. I think we can now draw the Q&A session to an end. Apologies for the ones that we did not answer. There were a lot, but we cannot possibly cover everything. I just want to end by thanking the BuildUp team to make this webinar possible. Thank, of course, our three speakers, Adrian, who helped me managing the questions here, and finally thank the audience, you who are listening in and who asked these relevant questions. I think it made the webinar really interesting, and we had a good exchange. Before we close our webinar, I would like to announce the next EuroACE BuildUp webinar, which will be on the topic of describing the energy performance of buildings and how to put energy efficiency first. Will probably take place in April, so stay tuned for more information. And with that, I wish you all a very nice day.